He is the founder of private military contractor and company Blackwater. He also founded, by the way, the Unplugged phone, which you could check out at unplugged.com. And he also hosts Off the Leash with Erik Prince, the author of Civilian Warriors, Erik Prince on the Will Cain Show. What's up, Erik?
Will, how you doing? Nice to be here.
I'm doing well. I'm glad to have you here. So, Erik, you and I've had some fascinating and deeper conversations, I think, about what's going on the world stage, which we need to get into today. But if I sat here and started our conversation today with, what is the most important thing that needs to be done inside the Department of Defense, what would you identify?
It's not even about gear. It's always about people. I would rather have a few lions than a whole lot of sheep. And I think if you think back to George Marshall became Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army September 1, 1939, literally the same day that the Nazis invaded Poland. And he immediately set to work firing lots of generals and colonels, clearing out the deadwood who were fully prepared to fight the last war, World War I, trench warfare and the like. And he actively sought to immediately prepare the U.S. military for the fight that was coming. The next SecDef, and I really hope it's Pete Hegseth, must prepare the U.S. military to do the same. The revolution in warfare that's occurred, even since the Russians invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, the explosion of drone use, the automation of warfare, everything can be precision targeted now, means that hundreds of billions of dollars of our installed stuff is outdated and is just a target. And on top of that, we've had a leadership class of the U.S. military, which has kind of been getting fat and getting used to doing things the old way and still wanting to fight the global war on terror approach to fighting against a very unsophisticated enemy, wearing flip-flops and operating out of the hills versus preparing for a significant state competitor that has lots of innovation and lots of industrial might to throw at us. We are in a very, very dangerous place right now, and it requires swift, sudden, and I would say severe leadership adjustment to prepare our military, because we depend on that as a society to defend. Everything that's in the past is not guaranteed to happen in the future. So for the smug American elites that think that, well, we'll always just win a war, that is exceedingly dangerous, especially since they are not the ones that have generally served, nor is it their kin that are serving in harm's way who would be the first to suffer from their exceedingly bad woke decisions.
I want to talk about this. You'd rather have 10 lions than 100 sheep, the personnel problem. The way I see it, and I hear you describing it, Erik, I can almost see it on three levels. There is the man and woman, for that matter, joining the military and fighting the wars, our actual war fighters. Then there's decision makers, and we need to separate them on a separate level of those who have been influenced or placed wrongly at the top because of DEI, non-merit-based initiatives. But I want to start with the third layer, which is the career military man, the career general. I've heard that a lot, what you said, Erik, about we always fight yesterday's war. We're fighting wars 10 years ago. Technologically and strategically, we're not looking forward. The leadership class that is gearing our military towards wars from the past, is that a product of simply a lack of vision, A, defense contractors that have the ability to continue to sell yesterday's equipment, and it's hard and expensive to develop tomorrow's equipment? Or is it, C, this type of person, and I've had this conversation with various individuals, that the military in and of itself, Erik, is not merit-based. I can speak to a lot of companies in America that also satisfy this definition, meaning they're in it not to lose, they're not in it to win. You are populated at the top by people who don't want to lose their jobs. And as such, they make decisions that are risk-averse. And the way you get promoted is by just sticking around. Like, you just stick around, you don't get fired, you don't jump the line either, so that the people that get to the top are survivalist. I've heard Donald Trump talk about this. Or they're just thoroughly indoctrinated into bureaucracy over a lifetime of what's doing necessary to promote. I kind of want to get into that class because, for example, if Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense and he needs to reform that leadership class, how deep, how broad is the problem? How many generals have to be fired at DOD?
It's at the beginning of World War II, like I talked about, they cleared house of a lot of deadwood generals preparing for the old war. We never did that in Global War on Terror. Nobody has been fired, not even for being not innovative, but for failure. So you have a culture of no accountability that must be reinstalled in the U.S. military. As for the lack of technological innovation, I mean, you've heard of a Gatling gun, right? The 6 or 8 barrel multi-barrel fast firing cannon that was first developed in the American Civil War by a guy that developed corn planters, Richard Gatling. He took it to the chief of U.S. Army Ordnance, and who said, "Why would I want a gun that used so much ammunition?" But Gatling persisted, and he did a demonstration of live fire for Lincoln on the National Mall in front of the White House. They finally made him buy it on the spot. The same with aircraft. The Wright brothers developed the aircraft, magnificent success. They took it to the U.S. military and said, why would we need aircraft? We have balloons for artillery spotting. So being bureaucratic and always thinking about what was done in the past, not what's in the future, is the way of any large-scale bureaucracy. But ours is compounded by the fact that we've thrown more money at it than in any organization in human history, and it's re-insulated fat layer upon fat layer upon fat layer, which really needs to be thinned out severely to make it effective. There are great leaders in the military that manage, look, we still have the best E5s and O3s of any military in the world. That I believe. The problem is they get sick and tired of being led by lambs instead of by lions, and so they end up leaving. There's an enormous pool of very capable people that will fight to defend America if it came to it, but they're not in positions of responsibility right now. So again, it is a leadership challenge. I think Pete is up to the job. He will certainly need help because it's a full court press, but this is a very, very serious threat. And at the geopolitical level, Trump's got to get the Ukraine war settled to pull Russia away from the orbit of China, all at those levels. But the U.S. military must be prepared to fight tonight, and it is not. And you're right about getting rid of the culture of diversity and all the rest. And he must focus on lethality, lethality, and lethality.
Just as a diversion, I'm going to come back to what we are defining are the problems and, in essence, the job for Pete Hegseth at DOD. But as a quick diversion into current events, I saw reports, Eric, today, I believe North Korea's sending, 100,000 troops to help Russia. And Biden has authorized Ukraine to use long-range missiles, weapons to attack Russia. We're in this transition period focused domestically. Where are we right now in the world and how fragile everything is when it comes to war?
We are not in a great place. The U.S. weapon systems are not in high demand in Ukraine because a lot of the stuff doesn't work. If they expose ATACMS, which is the long-range missile they want to use, the Russians are going to have a chance to intercept it, to read that RF, that electronic signature from it, and figure out how to jam it. The deep strike by ATACMS missiles is not going to change or fix the war. I think the North Korean troops is largely cannon fodder. I'd say that's more of a financial deal and financial incentive for Kim to sell more weapons. But again, it is definitely the interest and the policy of the United States to get that war settled, because a Russia that is in a subservient role to China is a very, very dangerous place for the United States and the West. And I spoke to a leader who had been at every BRICS meeting, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia convention of countries. And he said all the previous BRICS meetings, it was definitely parity between Putin and Russia. But this last time, where they just met last month in Russia, there was definitely more of a subservience of Russia to China, and that is exceedingly dangerous for us. We do not want, it was always for 100 years the policy to keep German industry away from Russian resources, and now all we've done is push Russian resources into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. Dumb, and dangerous.
Let's go back to our sort of diagnosis of the problem and checklist of priorities for Pete Hegseth, should he be confirmed, and we think that he will be confirmed as the Secretary of Defense. That second layer of bureaucracy, he's talked a lot about it, Eric, the DEI woke initiatives, the non-lethality initiatives. I wonder how much this is driven by a small pool of people. I wonder how wide that problem is. I know it's at the military colleges, Eric. I know it's at West Point. I know it's at the Naval Academy. I also wonder, and I know it's in lower level units, but how much of that is responding to incentive that is driven by a small pool of people in the leadership class? Meaning, is this something that is solved by a few targeted firings? Can it be cut out surgically and then re-place an incentive structure that the rest of the military follows back to lethality?
Yes and no. I would say yes. There's the leadership of that religious sect, and that's really what it is, have to be dismissed from U.S. military service. They can go do something else, but they don't have to be standing on the wall defending the country. But I'm concerned at the lack of moral courage of the senior enlisted, the mid-grade officers, and the senior officers for allowing that nonsense to go on to say, BS, not on my watch. I will not allow this to happen. There's been no resignations out of disgust, or maybe a few, not nearly enough of people saying no. I mean, this is supposed to be a tough, independent thinking, morally courageous set of officers, and we haven't seen that. I mean, look, the only guy that was punished for all things bad in Afghanistan was Stuart Scheller, who was man enough to call BS and demand accountability on the really, really failed officers that allowed that massive international embarrassment, a century embarrassment that will hang around our neck for decades.
One of the things that I really appreciated about getting to know Pete over my life is his clear-eyed vision on the mission, which is to create the world's most lethal fighting force in defense of the United States of America. In his clear-eyed vision of that, you know, he doesn't let anything get in the way of that simple, although hard to do, but simple purpose-intended mission of the U.S. military. And so that can lead to what seems like controversial statements that he said very openly, but he owns, for example, that he does not believe that women should be on the front lines of combat. I saw, I believe it was one of the first female Marines that led an all-female Marine force into Iraq. This was on Instagram, and she's now like a celebrity influence, celebrity exercise influencer, Eric. And when I first saw it and somebody sent it to me, I was like, oh boy, here we go. And then I listened to it, and she gave this like long speech where basically she said, I agree with Pete Hegseth. I did this. I fought. I led. And I see the problems. And she said, there will always be exceptions to any rule, but as a general rule, this is not what makes us the most lethal fighting force.
Let me be clear on that one. The Marine Corps did an absolute measured test at Fort Irwin, California, of an all-male Marine unit, a blended unit, male-female, and an all-female unit in a combat exercise. And they put GPSs and heart rate monitors and everything on every soldier to measure their performance, everything from the firing rate for artillery pieces to how quickly they could put up a camp to refueling, rearming, repairing tanks. Okay, all that stuff is heavy. It requires actual physical strength. And in the performance, the performance metrics were not even remotely close. And so if we're going to have a military that is solely focused on being lethal, that's what we must focus on. Be focused on what those metrics are, not on someone's diversity or their childhood. I don't care if a little girl always dreamed of being a tank driver. Some things maybe are not meant to be. Maybe I dreamed of being a ballerina. Not going to work for me either.
It's a good way to put it in first person. I don't know, Eric. Maybe you could have been a ballerina. Yeah, I don't want to put anything beyond you. But if I'm placing the bet on Polymarket, I'm not saying ballerina Erik Prince. All right, then there's the third level. That's the third level when we take it down to the lower level soldier. And this is where the job, I think, is big. And also, again, I think well-suited for Pete Hegseth. And that's the recruitment efforts that we've had, the failures, the difficulties that we've had for quite some time in the United States military, Eric. Like I feel like we do it on Fox and Friends on definitely an annual basis, but the Marine Corps, the Army, the Navy, missing targets year after year on the number of people signing up to serve. Now, I am sure that is a complicated equation on many levels when it includes career prospects and personal ambition, pay options for a lot of individuals. But, I think certainly as someone who's got to be around guys like you, around guys like Bear Hamlin, who was a Navy SEAL I was with this weekend, around guys like Army vet Pete Hegseth, it needs to be more attractive through mass culture, popular culture, and ultimately more attractive across culture in the United States. And I think that's the problem when we get to that third tier. We're not getting enough good men to sign up to serve. And I do think that can be affected by Pete Hegseth.
I agree. Two things. One, we have a vastly too tail heavy of a military. And when I say tooth is the lethal pointy end part of the military, the tail is like 12 times the size of the teeth. That's grotesque and it can be fixed. Two, there are lots of very, very talented people that would serve in the military. I think there's a lot more can be done with a guard and reserve capability where people would join and go hard for 2 years and then be out in a guard capacity where they get to go do commando stuff for 1 or 2 months a year. And the rest of the month they're in a regular career. That is a healthier, more effective, cost-effective mix. I've talked to a lot of special operations, like the 19th and 20th group SF guys said, man, they would much rather have guardsmen in their 40s or 50s who are doing regular careers because of the actual diversity of skill sets and maturity that they bring to the mission was phenomenal and innovative, and it increased their lethality. Cutting a lot of the nonsense out of training will attract more and more of the right people. And yes, the culture supporting that and making it something that was expected. I served in the military. I have family members that are serving in the military because they're not going to do it for a career, but it's something that people regard as a payment back to the Republic for the pleasure of living in the United States of America. Citizenship should mean something, and I have nothing but great experience, great memories of the time I served, and I think that's the case of most people. But the other thing that will help recruiting is a promise to not be half-assed in how we go to war anymore. There's no half measures. You're not going to have to call a lawyer sitting 1,000 miles away in a cubicle, in an air-conditioned cubicle, for permission to drop a bomb on your enemy's head anymore. That is a unserious way. Those rules are made by elites sitting in Washington that never have to live with the nonsense of their decision-making. That's playing at war, not being at war.
I have to own this to start in this conversation. I didn't serve. And I have said on many occasions, by the way, both of these regrets that I have two great regrets in life. And both of these regrets have been influenced by Pete Hegseth. I believe that when I lay my head down for the last time in this life, I will regret, A, not having more children. I have 2. I wish I had more. It's really the greatest thing in life. And B, that I didn't serve the United States of America. Now, I think that I have thought about this, and I know it doesn't serve the purpose of the mission, which is to create the most lethal fighting force on the face of the planet. But compelled service, Eric, there's something to that I find fascinating, that it creates a society with a common thread. Everybody has some base level of investment in the United States of America if you have to give 2 years, say, to some type of service. But I know that's not the purpose. We're not trying to create a more cohesive society. We're trying to create a more lethal fighting force. But that's pretty fascinating what you said about different ways to get people to serve, that a life of reservist or guardsman commitment actually creates people, because of their career diversity, that create a more lethal fighting force than maybe compelled service or even a young I think it's always been something we've been proud of, that we have a voluntary fighting force, but a young force that comes in because it's what they need to do for money, or because That's what the best options are in their career at that point in time. I think it is interesting to get creative about how you get men back into the military.
I think there could be some admissions preference to certain elite universities that would come with military service. Certainly, other financial benefits for having served, for college, for healthcare, for down payment for a house, whatever. I think there's a lot of creative ways, especially when you cut. And I'm not saying about increasing defense spending. I think we can cut defense spending and actually improve the quality of the force, improve the quality of lethality by cutting away the fat and the nonsense, because the fat and the nonsense drives away your most lethal people.
All right, we've bounced around this. In laying out the priorities now and talking through the problems, you've suggested this in the course of conversation, but I want to ask it directly. As we talk about this, do you believe that Pete Hegseth is the right man to address these problems and reorganize the priorities of the United States military at the Department of Defense?
Yes, I do. Look, he's right. Younger. That's wonderful. It is time. I want a SecDef who has actually had to live to feel in battle the bad choices made in Washington and by the senior officers above them. So there is that level of disdain for the status quo, because the status quo is absolutely untenable and will lose us in the next war. So we need that level of focus and vigor to fix the problem, because he's doing it for his brothers that he also served with. It cannot be another Beltway type person. And woe be it unto the senators that think they're smarter than the hundreds of thousands of veterans that have actually served, that are not going to put up with this nonsense any longer. If you want a military that's going to plummet in recruiting and push back, do that.
Well, the cost of your recommendation is that I won't have a running buddy, obviously on Fox, but I also won't have somebody to swim with me across the Hudson, do push-ups and pull-ups and hang with Navy SEALs. So the price you'll have to pay, Eric, is I'll see you next August.
Come on. Whoa, come on. Well, why wouldn't Pete do that? I did the first one, and I think Pete could do that too as SecDef.
There we go. Yeah. Well, my cost to you was you're going to have to do it again. It's been long enough since you've done the first one. You're going to have to come back this coming August. But you're right. Like, get a security detail, Secretary, Mr. Secretary, and we'll see you in the Hudson.
He could put some frogmen on his detail. He'd be just fine.
I think that's right. I think you're one of the safest places you can be from everything except a slight cold, maybe a skin infection from the Hudson, is with a bunch of Navy SEALs and other servicemen as you swim across the Hudson to Manhattan. Maybe one of which will also be Erik Prince.
I'll never forget getting in the water and swimming up, and I'm head down, swimming hard against the tide, and then I look up, and there is the Statue of Liberty looking straight up at me. It was just absolutely a great American moment that I will never forget.
It's incredible. Yeah, and you're right. Why not, Mr. Secretary? All right, Erik Prince, the founder of Blackwater, the unplugged phone here on the Will Cain Show. I always like having you on, Eric. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for doing the Will Cain Show.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for having me. Keep fighting.
Right. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.